Now we have Mr. Yuval Noah Harari, the writer of *Sapiens*, *Homo Deus*, and other books. And we are going to talk to him about the world after coronavirus. And Mr. Harari, thank you very much for taking part in our program. In your second book, *Homo Deus*, you say that humanity has managed to rein in three big problems in its history: famines, wars, and epidemics. But yes, here in 21st century, we are seeing a huge epidemic, and the humanity seems as if it can't control it. Tens of thousands of people have died in cities like New York and London. The most advanced countries are all in danger of losing more of their citizens. What has gone wrong as far as you are concerned?
Well, first, we need to understand that, of course, we cannot prevent the initial outbreaks of new epidemics. This is a natural process of viruses and bacteria undergoing mutations or jumping from animals to humans. We can't stop that. That's just nature. But in contrast to every previous era in history, we are now in a much, much better position to stop the epidemic, because for the first time in history, we have the scientific knowledge and the technological tools to do it. When the Black Death spread in the Middle Ages, nobody understood what was happening. Nobody understood what was killing people and how it can be stopped. The medical faculty in the University of Paris thought that the reason was astrological, that because of the conjunction of the planets in the sky, this epidemic began. Nobody realized it was bacteria coming from fleas on rats. Even a century ago, during the big Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918, which killed more than 50 million people, throughout the epidemic, nobody knew what was causing people to die. In contrast, we today, it took just 2 weeks for scientists to correctly identify the coronavirus, to sequence its entire genome, and to develop reliable tests. We have everything we need to control this epidemic. Our situation is better than ever before, but having the power to control it does not mean we have the wisdom to use our power in the right way. This depends not just on scientists, this depends also on politicians, on business people, on ordinary people, and they don't always make the right decisions. I still think we can control it. For the first time in history, we have the power, but it's up to the decisions that we make. And some people, some politicians have made bad decisions during this crisis and even in the last few years. But still, I think it's not too late. We can still stop this thing before it becomes as destructive as the 1918 influenza or as the Black Death.
What do you think we need to do, Mr. Harari? What do you think leaders, everybody else should do to control this epidemic and also to stop future epidemics in the earlier stages if they happen?
The key is cooperation and information. The big advantage of humans over viruses is that we can cooperate and exchange information in a way that viruses can't. A virus in China cannot give advice to a virus in the United States or in Iran about how to infect people and how to evade the body's immune system. Humans, on the other hand, we have this great ability to cooperate and exchange information. Doctors in China can give advice to doctors in the United States. The government of Korea can give advice to the government of Spain. We can make a common effort to produce medical equipment, to develop a vaccine. If we use these powers, we can easily, I think, overcome this epidemic. It's not the Middle Ages. The Black Death killed maybe a third of the population of Asia and Europe. Now, if we can still prevent this epidemic from killing more than maybe a few hundred of thousands of people. It's still a huge catastrophe, but it's nothing like the Black Death or epidemics in previous era.
Yes.
And the key is cooperation.
Yes, you're talking about cooperation, but the fact of the matter is the world order we have at the moment are nation states. We have borders, but we are facing an enemy which doesn't recognize any border. As you have said in your recent writings, it's a global crisis and it needs a global solution. But what we have in nation states, and countries are even becoming more nationalistic than before, don't you think the world order we have is inadequate in dealing with global crises like coronavirus, like global warming, and there are other issues?
Yes, this is my main fear, my main concern. I don't fear the virus as much as I fear the inner demons of humans. They are our biggest enemy. Again, of course, I'm not against nation states and borders. We need them. I'm not in favor of having just a single global government or something like that. We need nation states, but we need them to cooperate with each other. The important thing to realize about nationalism is that nationalism can be a very good thing if we remember what nationalism really is. Nationalism isn't about hating foreigners. Nationalism is about loving your compatriots and taking care of them. And in many cases, to really take care of your compatriots, you need to cooperate with foreigners. So I don't think there is any inevitable contradiction between nation states and global cooperation. Unfortunately, in the last few years, we saw a deteriorating atmosphere in the world with extreme nationalist leaders and populist leaders trying to deliberately destroy global solidarity. And now we are paying the price for it, because when we need it most, we don't have this cooperation. So I'm not afraid of the virus. I'm afraid of things like hatred within humans. We see now countries blaming each other for the virus. We see religious and ethnic minorities being blamed for spreading the epidemic. I just heard terrible news from India about how extreme Hindus in India are blaming Muslims for deliberately spreading this epidemic in India. They call it things like corona terrorism.
Yes.
And this is what I'm really afraid of. Because if we are going in that direction of starting to hate other people and turning this into a kind of war between humans, then we won't be able to deal with the virus, and the world will be in a much, much worse situation than before.
Mr. Harari, I was reading an article in Jerusalem Post, in Haaretz, by Shlomo Aviniri the other day, the great Israeli socialist, and he was saying the individualism which capitalist states over the last decades have defended and promoted has brought us to a stage when things like this happen, there is no cooperation. Everybody is thinking of himself or herself, and we don't care about our neighbors, our colleagues. And this is, he says, a disease of, maybe he didn't use the word, I'm using it, of the capitalist system we have at the moment. And also earlier statistics showing that most victims are minorities, Black Americans, Latinos, the poorer sections of society. So how about the capitalist system itself? Is capitalist system has to be blamed for this inability in dealing with crises like this?
I think we need a balanced approach. I mean, the more extreme forms of capitalism, which say that each individual just takes care of himself or herself, and something like a government-sponsored healthcare system, we shouldn't have something like that. I think people realize this can't work. Everybody, almost everybody, now realize that at least in things like healthcare, we can't rely on the free market and on the capitalist system. We need a universal government-sponsored healthcare system. because a free market system can't prepare and can't deal with these epidemics. For example, when things are normal, a free market system will not stockpile enough ventilators in order to deal with a crisis. Because they say, okay, we just need 20 ventilators today. Maybe if there is a global epidemic, we need 200, but we are not going to pay for 180 ventilators we don't need. It's the money of the people who buy our insurance, and they won't buy our insurance if we spend it on things they don't need. So this kind of capitalist healthcare system, we see it just doesn't work. We need a government and a general plan of how to prepare even for eventualities like epidemics. But it doesn't mean that we need to completely abandon the capitalist system. We just need to make it more balanced. There are some areas when capitalism works very well. There are other areas like healthcare when it just doesn't, and we need to combine the two systems together.
The other point you have made in your recent writings about this crisis is the danger of totalitarianism in the future. And you have said that this epidemic might mark an important watershed in the history of surveillance, because
Yes.
governments are more and more using apps and mobile phone technology to trace people, and you fear that this could become a norm in the future, a kind of dystopian scenario which you have pointed out. What are your fears about this surveillance state and danger of totalitarianism in the future?
Well, first, we see that now surveillance is being accepted even in democratic countries, which previously rejected it. And once it enters, it's very difficult to take it out again. People say, well, it's just an emergency. When the emergency is over, we will dismantle this new surveillance system, but it usually doesn't happen like that. It's easy to take it in, very difficult to take it out again, because there is always a new emergency. Even if this crisis is over, people will fear the next wave of coronavirus or flu or something else, and the system will stay. And it's not just that it's spreading to more countries, it's changing its nature. Previously, surveillance was mainly from the skin outwards. It was above the skin. Now it's becoming under the skin. What do I mean by that? Well, over the skin surveillance is when the government or maybe a corporation is watching where I go, who I meet, which TV shows I see. But it's still all above the skin. They don't know what's happening under the skin, inside my body, inside my brain. So maybe the government knows that you are now watching this TV show. And it gives it some information about your political views, about your social habits, maybe even about your personality. Different people watch different TV shows. But now with this new surveillance that tries to see what's happening under your skin, what's your body temperature, what's your heartbeat, what's your brain activity, this kind of information can disclose not only your medical condition, whether you have corona, it can also disclose how you feel every moment. If you wear a biometric bracelet that monitors every moment your body temperature, your heartbeat, your blood pressure, that can give the government knowledge, not just about what disease you have, but also how you feel about what you see on television. Are you scared by what you're hearing? Are you bored by it? Do you like it? You don't like it? Just imagine a place like North Korea in 10 years when every citizen has to wear a biometric bracelet, and when you maybe watch on television or hear on the radio a speech by the big leader, they know how you feel about it. If you're angry about the big leader, then you can smile, you can force yourself to smile. Yes, I like big leader. And you can clap your hands, wonderful what big leader says, but they know that you're actually angry because they are watching your blood pressure, your body temperature, and you have no control over that. So this is the kind of totalitarian regime that can be established with this new biometric surveillance system, the initial excuse will be, we just care about your health to monitor epidemics. But feelings are biological phenomena just like diseases. If you have a system that can know if I have corona, the same system can know whether I'm angry or happy about what the leader says. And that's extremely dangerous.
Yes, what we can do to avoid such a dystopian future, if I may say so. What we can do, what humanity needs to do. Because as you have said many times, when people are put in a situation whether they prefer their health or privacy, everybody goes for their health. So the governments know that and they can use that fear. And what can we do to protect our liberty, our human rights, and also to remain healthy so the governments don't abuse that fear?
We should avoid framing the choice in terms of privacy or health. What do you prefer? You can have both privacy and health. When you go to your family doctor, then you don't have to choose between privacy and health. You tell the doctor maybe the deepest secrets about your health, your condition, even your sex life in some cases, and you trust your doctor to take care of your health and at the same time to keep the information private, not to tell it to the police, not to tell it to your boss, maybe not even to tell it to your husband or wife. You have confidentiality. So you can take care both of health and privacy. And we need this kind of system also on the level of the entire nation or the entire world. Yes, I am in favor of using surveillance to stop epidemics, but it should be done carefully. First of all, the authority in charge of surveillance, it shouldn't be the police, it shouldn't be the security forces. Ideally, it should be an independent healthcare authority, which is only in charge of stopping epidemics, and it doesn't share the information with anybody else. So that's very important. Secondly, surveillance must always go both ways. Not only the government monitors the people, at the same time, the people monitoring the government. In a dictatorship, it only goes one way. The government knows everything about you. You don't know anything about the government, what decisions they are making, why. So we need it to go both ways. For example, today, we have not just an epidemic, we also have a huge economic crisis. Governments are spending billions, trillions of dollars. As a citizen, I want the same way that they monitor me to see if I have the disease, I want to monitor them and see exactly where the money is going and why. If we have such a two-way system of surveillance, then it protects us against totalitarian regimes. Like if the government decides to use the opportunity to save some big corporations, which are owned by the friends of the prime minister or the president, and not to save small businesses, like small shops and restaurants, I want to know that, and I want to understand why. If we have this two-way surveillance, then it's much, much better. It protects the democratic system much better.
Mr. Harari, we are social animals, but this coronavirus and the isolation, which in London it is almost now 4 weeks, and it may take longer, and we may have future crisis again, and more isolation. We are social animals. We love to chat, we love to meet, we love to make love. All of them are forbidden these days. My question to you is, if you have more self-isolation like we are going through now and more quarantines and all that, how that is going to affect us as human species, the sapiens?
Yes. Well, I think that it will not have such a big effect as people fear. Our social nature is so deep within us that it's much, much stronger than this epidemic or any other epidemic in history. The virus is using our social instincts against us. We like to meet other people. When our friends or family are sick, we want to come and help them and hug them and be there for them. And this is how the virus spreads itself. So it's using our best instincts against us. But our big advantage is that whereas the virus is a mindless piece of information that cannot change its behavior, we have a mind, we have a rational mind, we can understand what's happening and change our behavior and act from the head and not from the heart. And when the crisis is over, our human nature will still be there. Don't worry. We saw this with previous epidemics. If you think, for example, about, I don't know, even AIDS in the 1980s, and if you think about the LGBT community and how it reacted, even though it was a much worse epidemic, if you got AIDS in the 1980s, you died. There was no question about it. And the state was not giving any help. Many politicians said it's good. It's good that we'll get rid of all the homosexuals and all the gay people. And what actually happened is that people came together to establish voluntary organizations to help sick people, to spread reliable information. And after the epidemic, the LGBT community was actually stronger and not weaker than before the epidemic. And we see it in previous epidemics in history, after the Black Death, which was much, much more terrible than what we are seeing now. People did not stop after the Black Death to meet friends or to have sex. So there are many things to worry about in this epidemic, but we shouldn't worry about that. Our social nature is much stronger than this.
All right. You mentioned the Black Death. Some historians have pointed out that the Black Death may have contributed to the emergence of Renaissance in the Middle Ages. Do you think that a crisis like this, it is not, of course, the same scale as Black Death in the Middle Ages, but could this bring good things as well for us, if you want to be a little bit positive about this coronavirus?
Yes, it can. For example, what we discussed earlier, over the last few years, we have seen increasing international tensions and the kind of collapse of the international system. And this crisis could make humans realize how dangerous is this disunity. And if it causes people and countries to cooperate better and to develop their global solidarity, this will help us deal with even bigger problems in the future, like climate change. The same way that we can't deal with coronavirus on a national level, we need cooperation, it's the same with climate change. So this could be one good result. Another good result could be an increase of trust in science and in scientific authority. In recent years, again, we saw a wave of these populist politicians and regimes which were anti-science, which said that scientists are this small elite disconnected from the people and we shouldn't listen to them. And you had all these conspiracy theories that climate change is just a hoax and that vaccines are actually causing autism and that the world is flat and all these ridiculous things. And it was spreading. Now, a good thing you already see all over the world is that in a time of real crisis, almost everybody understands that we need to rely on the scientific experts. In Israel, they closed down the synagogues. I heard that in Iran, they closed down mosques and shrines. Churches all over the world are telling people, don't come to church. Why? Because the scientists said so. Because the scientists recommended closing down these holy places for the duration of the epidemic. And even the religious leaders are listening to them. So hopefully, even after this crisis is over, people will realize that they need to rely on science and to give children better scientific education. Because if you don't have a scientific education, it's very easy to mislead you with stupid conspiracy theories. If you don't know what a virus is and how a virus causes disease, then you can believe all kinds of silly stories. But if in school they taught you what a virus is, how viruses mutate and evolve, how new epidemics start, then in a time of crisis like this, you could rely on the population not to believe in silly conspiracy theories. But for that, you need to teach good science in school.
Yeah.
And I hope one of the good outcomes of this crisis will be that governments all over the world will increase their spending and on scientific education in schools.
Yes, you mentioned Iran. I would like to ask you a few questions about Iran. You are very famous in Iran. Your books, The Sapiens and Homo Deus, are translated and published in Iran, but later the government realized that it was a dangerous book as far as they were concerned. They tried to ban it, but still many people have read your book and continue to read your books. You have repeatedly said during the recent coronavirus crisis that people need to have trust in their governments, in their media, and in science. These things don't exist in Iran in a way. The people don't trust the government because government repeatedly lies to them. They don't trust the media because the media are controlled by the government. And also science is not taken as seriously as, let's say, religious ideas. My question to you, in countries like that, where you have a situation like this, how you can fight a crisis like coronavirus?
So there are quite a few countries in which, because of past mistakes, that the government spreading lies and propaganda and so forth, people rightly don't trust the government. And why should they trust them now in a crisis like this? So in this situation, my best advice is to listen to outside authorities which you do trust. Don't believe the government, but do believe the World Health Organization, which is a trustworthy source of information, and just compare. Listen to what the government is saying. Don't take it as just the truth because the government said so. Compare this to what the World Health Organization is saying. And if there is a contradiction, it's better to believe the World Health Organization. Similarly, if not even the government, if somebody is spreading some theory about the origin and spread of this virus, then you can first of all ask these questions, some basic scientific questions, like, okay, please explain to me what is a virus and how does it cause disease? If the person cannot give you a satisfactory answer, if they have no clue what a virus is, just discount whatever else this person is telling you about the epidemic. And yes, I hope that after the crisis, governments like the Iranian governments will learn the huge price that they pay when they continuously spread lies. And then in a time of emergency, the citizens can't rely on them.
Yes, it's not only lies. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, who is the highest authority in the country, have also said that this virus was invented by the Americans because Americans hate Iran and they want to destabilize Iran. My question is, when you have the highest authority in the country putting that kind of theories about this coronavirus, how it affects the fight to combating this problem?
It's terrible because, first of all, it undermines the attempt to fight this epidemic together internationally. I mean, after you say something like that, you can't really expect the Americans to cooperate with you. If an American company now invents a vaccine against coronavirus, Iran would probably want to get the vaccine. But by spreading this kind of misinformation, you're not making it easier. And also, many people in Iran would realize that this is ridiculous. I mean, the Americans invented it. I mean, there are many more people infected and dead in the USA than in Iran. There are many more Americans who died and will die probably from this epidemic than Iranians. So if the Americans invented it, they're extremely incompetent, spreading it in their own country and killing tens of thousands of their own citizens. I mean, this is really ridiculous. And we now have so much scientific knowledge about this epidemic. This is not a Black Death. Again, in the Middle Ages, people didn't know what was happening. They spread rumors, for instance, that the Jews are deliberately spreading this epidemic. And this was credible because nobody really understood what was happening. Now we have exact scientific information about the genetic code of the virus, where it spread from, which animals originally carried it. It was probably bats. So if there is really no excuse to spread these kinds of stories, and the price we will all pay for it is enormous. Because if we can't have international cooperation, no country will be safe as long as the virus keeps spreading in any country. All humanity is in danger because it can always come back to your country and reinfect it again.
My last question to you, and you mentioned that in Israel they are closing synagogues, and mentioned also Iran, what Iran is doing. Yes, in Iran they are closing holy shrines, they are banning all ritual gatherings for religious reasons. But these shrines in Iran have always been portrayed as houses of healing. So when we go to these shrines to be cured, and now you have a terrible disease, COVID-19, and these shrines are closed. So this goes against centuries of belief in Iran, and you have a religious state in Iran. My question to you is, how this is going to affect the role of religion and people's, especially masses, the masses of the people's belief in religion being a source of cure for their diseases?
Well, ideally, I think it should encourage people to put more trust in science than in all kinds of religious beliefs. And again, the good sign is that even the government of Iran and the government of Israel is realizing it. And therefore, they are ordering to close down these places. I mean, in Israel, we had a case, we had an election 2 months ago, and one of the religious parties, they promised that whoever votes for our party in the election will not be sick from coronavirus. And what do you know? The leader of that party, who is also the health minister of Israel, he got coronavirus. So everybody is now joking that he didn't vote for his own party, obviously.
Yes.
So in Israel, you do see a crisis of belief in the religious authorities. I don't know whether it will last afterwards. I mean, you know, the big strength of religious leaders, they are not very good in healing, but they are very good in making up stories and excuses. Whatever happens, they always have a story to explain it. Like, I don't know, you pray for rain and there is no rain. They wouldn't say that they failed. They will invent some story to explain why you actually didn't pray the right way. And this is their expertise. They are the best in the world in making excuses. Yeah. But I think that the good thing is, over the long run, people realize that doctors are good at healing, religious leaders are very good at making excuses, and if you really want to be, you don't want your doctors to make excuses about why you died. You want to be healed. And I think more and more people will trust the doctors and not the religious leaders.
Mr. Harari, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.